Okay, hello and welcome back for day 4 of the Nudge virtual conference, everyone. I'm Kyle Webster. I'm the Chief of Staff at Forma AI, and I'll be your moderator for today. We're going to be diving into a discussion today on data-driven incentive planning. So being data-driven, I think, is a term that's thrown around a lot. It's not always executed on in practice. So excited to dive into what this really means from a sales comp perspective with our expert panel today. I'm joined by Bethany, Les, Brian, and Courtney, and I'll pass it over now to each of them to introduce themselves. Courtney, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Gimbroni. My current role is I am the Vice President of Global Compensation at ZoomInfo. So I have responsibility for broad-based compensation, executive comp, equity, and sales compensation.
Hey everybody, my name is Brian Bolt. I'm the Senior Director of our Incentive Performance and Analytics Group. We handle about 5,000 or so salespeople's target incentive comp management for our community.
Hi everyone, my name is Les Reef. I'm a Senior Director Sales Compensation Delivery at Rogers Communications based out of Toronto, Canada. My team is responsible for calculating and paying the commissions for all of our internal sales reps as well as our external partners. And great being here.
Hi there, Bethany Rucker. I'm at Thomson Reuters on the 93rd day as Director of Incentive Compensation Operations. And my team is primarily focused on comp design, but I've had roles in the past in comp analytics and comp execution, all of those things. Delighted to be here.
Okay, thanks everyone. So let's dive in, and we're going to start a little bit higher level here, but would love to kick off with getting the group's perspective on, what really does having a data-driven incentive strategy mean to each of you? And maybe Bethany, if you could kick us off, that would be great.
Yeah, delighted to. It's so important to have a sense of a hypothesis of the things that you're trying to drive in an organization. What is the strategy? What is the end goal that you're trying to drive? And you can't get there unless you have a roadmap, and data is the roadmap, right? In the podcast I was on with Nabil, we talked about data kind of being a smorgasbord, a Thanksgiving dinner of all of this opportunity and all of this data. But the wisdom is picking the data that means the most to the strategies that you really want to drive, paying attention to those, having a cadence for review, being really structured in that review. So that's what data-driven means to me.
Yeah, I can kind of second that. I totally agree with everything that Bethany just said. I think, the other really important factor is making sure that it's truly tied to your business performance. If you're reporting something out and finance is reporting out certain business metrics and certain performance metrics, it's really important that the sales team sees that as exactly what they're being measured on as well. So whether it's revenue, whether it's bookings, making sure that the way that the company looks at success in the way that you're incenting success is directly tied.
Yeah, I would agree with what Brian said as well. For us, tying the performance of sales to business performance is a critical piece. There's so much data that's out there, especially these days, in terms of business performance data, all the customer interactions, and just being able to use that data and selecting which data elements are the key ones that you need to look at and kind of monitor, and which are going to indicate the comp plan is driving the performance that you want. So things, but at the most basic level, things like, are whatever the reps are, what the attainments are in the achievement of the reps, along with business performance, is the cost of the comp plan kind of in line with what is expected and so forth.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said. I think the connectedness of both the comp plans and what the company is trying to drive is extremely important. And what I always tell people too, as we're designing comp plans or designing incentive plans in general, is if we're not already measuring it and you're not already talking about it on a regular basis, like, we should not be putting it in the comp plans.
Makes sense. I mean, some great points in there around being hypothesis driven, making sure it's tied to business performance, and isn't something that you're just looking at one time and is recurring. I think Les, you made a point on like there being so much more data available now today, and I think that it's a really interesting point. I'm curious to get the group's perspective on, how has, being data driven in sales compensation really changed over the last 5 to 10 years or so? I mean, is this something that, it's more important today to incorporate data and analytics into our incentive strategy? And do you feel like there's more of an expectation from the organization and the business to do this today? Maybe Les, would it be great for you to kick that one off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's definitely way more data available than there was in the past. Obviously, a lot more systems are talking to each other. So there's a lot more connectivity between various, various pieces all the way kind of through the customer life cycle, all the way, to deal close, right? So how do you use some of that data? I think, in today's environment, data is, it's a competitive advantage or disadvantage if not used properly. And so, being able to kind of take advantage of the data assets that a company has is critical to, to kind of getting that advantage right ahead of your competitors, because the industries it is such a competitive environment, especially, with the company that I work for, Rogers, right? It's wireless sales, it's cable internet. So it's a very sort of tight business.
Yeah, I would add, oh, sorry, go ahead, Bethany.
I just so agree. I was going to say, I feel fortunate that one of my early roles in sales compensation was on an analytics team, and the opportunity to kind of dig in the dirt and get acquainted with a data set. I feel like every data set is a new language that we have to go and learn the quirks and learn the benefits and the risks thereof. But if we can get to that fluency, then I think it's really powerful and really meaningful. And the really cool thing about our roles in sales incentive compensation is that there's connectivity to all points in the organization. So we have an opportunity to influence a lot of ways, but provided that we really understand the data and the impact that we have upstream and downstream. But very curious to hear what Courtney has to say too.
I was just going to add that I think data's always been an element in sales comp. I've been in and around sales compensation for a little while now. So I think it's always been there, but I do think over the last even 4 or 5 years has increased significantly in terms of the expectation as we think about even just like the macro environmental components that have influenced like sales outcomes, even during COVID and kind of some of those other pieces. I think utilizing the data now in order to prove out like how do we really make sure that what we are asking our salespeople to do is both they're able to do it from a quota standpoint, and then actually able to like move the organization forward. These are the right metrics. So using those data points is, I think, even more important than it has been historically.
Yeah, and I'd add to one of the words that Bethany mentioned. Fluency was a word that was really I really keyed in on. At Red Hat, we transitioned from a single year booking metric for almost all sales comp design to a dual metric of ARR and/or recurring revenue and annual contract value. And the thing is like that fluency that they had, that our sales teams had and finance had and even operations had of SYB, of a bookings metric. We all assumed, because we had been talking about this transition for so long, that everyone would just hop in and they were at fluent levels with the new metrics. It did not work that way, right? Like, but they really entered in with a kindergarten level as opposed to a total fluency on these new metrics in the new language. And, even though that was the direction that a lot of people in software were headed, it really was a big challenge because there's so much more data, to Les's point. There's so much more data. There's so much more complexity in our transactions. And then switching up the metrics really just kind of threw everybody for a loop. I encourage people never underestimate how long it takes to enable somebody when you make that kind of a change.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense. And I think the data fluency is a really interesting point. And I think that's something we'll circle back on in this discussion for sure. I think just to bring this to life and get a little bit tactical, could each of you share a little bit more about, how you're actually leveraging analytics as part of your sales comp process design today? And, are there any specific examples of insights that really impacted your comp plan designs that you're able to share? Bethany, do you think you could kick off for this one?
I could only get myself off mute. Sure. I think about going back in time to when I worked for a telecom company, and I was involved in a really cool project where we were looking for market share in a new place. This was an organization that was known for kind of having high market share in the urban areas and wanted to branch out into more rural share. And so just the fact that we had that data to kind of flag, hey, this is an opportunity. And this is not what we're known for today, but this can be what we're known for tomorrow. And then to be on that journey as that comp plan changed, hey, we're gonna put a multiplier on the new green field, as it were, kinds of activations. And I think that's transferable to any organization, right? It's just, where's your opportunity and what have you got to go do to get those more profitable pieces of revenue, pieces of market share, and then what's going to motivate that in the simplest way possible. So I think about that moment in time. That was a really neat one that I got to see and be a part of, but it's translatable anyway.
Yeah, I think to build off of what Bethany said, I think kind of reminds me of what a project I worked on in a past life was. We actually connected opportunity data, so kind of tied to that market opportunity on the enterprise space, but at the account level. So essentially, we took all of the accounts in a given market, all of the companies, all the businesses over, let's say, 500 employees, and we built a kind of a spend propensity model, right? And so that said that this, based on the product we're selling, this company should buy X amount, based on the number of employees they have, like it could be laptops, desktops, whatever the product was. And then overlaid that, kind of built that into the compensation plan. So essentially, as you do your account assignments on all your, on your reps and your account executives, each of them will have a different opportunity, and you kind of base your comp plan based on that opportunity, right? So if somebody's kind of already has a high share of their accounts in terms of what they're doing from a business standpoint, then maybe their comp plan is going to be more like a farmer, a little bit different comp plan metrics and so forth. Whereas somebody who's a bit of a hunter will really have a more kind of aggressive type of comp plan, right? So that was just an example of kind of layering in some of that data specifically into the comp plans that ties to a company's objective of going into, say, like a new market or something like that.
Yeah, and I would argue, or not argue, but I'd add to a lot of that and say, at a lot of companies, you'd love to say that a lot of the data that you have really feeds a robust ROI, right? So that are you making the right investments in the right area? At least at Red Hat, and I think a lot of companies, that ROI analysis is not always as mature as we want it to be, right? So the data still allows you, though, to support decisions around course corrections on plan design. You can say, I've really tried to develop a plan to promote this product or to promote this service or promote this offering. If that desired result, if the desired growth isn't there, it may be the way that your plan was designed. And so when you look back at that data is going to allow you to support those course corrections. And I think that's really important to be able to do that in a timely manner.
Yeah, it's just brain sparked. Oh, go for it, Courtney, because I was going to quote you.
No, you're fine. Thank you. I was just going to add that similarly, like we've used data in order to identify like white space within customers to say, okay, is there a spiff that we need to implement? Is there something where we can do a short-term program in order to kind of move and see if it works versus like baking it into the plan overall and seeing if we need to do like a short-term plan in order to boost revenue or boost ACV or kind of whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish in that period of time. So utilizing that, we also use data analytics to monitor and make sure that the plans are working effectively. Like we had intended to pay people at certain levels. Like, is that still happening? Are they delivering on their quotas? Like making sure that we're aligning to kind of industry standards around who's achieving, overachieving, underachieving, et cetera.
I just loved what you had to say earlier about just like measuring things and how like if you're not measuring it today and you're not paying on it today, then why do we need a comp on it? Like, I just think that's so important because I think a lot of times we get distracted by the shiny new thing that everybody else is doing, where our businesses are unique, right? The connectivity, the connective tissue within our businesses to get from point A to point B is a little bit different because every company is different culturally. And so I just really appreciated what you had to say about like, let's keep the main thing, And if we need to comp on it, there better be a good reason. I just really appreciated that.
Yeah,
and I think it's really important for salespeople too, to be able to completely connect it, right? Like I hear what our CEO is saying about what we need to go deliver, and I know that my comp plan actually incentivizes me to do that.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that, you know, kind of to I think Bethany's point around the shiny new thing or the next thing, right? It's a lot of times within comp, you know, you really want to get the basics, the foundation, right? So things around making sure the reps understand what the plan is, making sure there's good kind of training, communication on that. And you know, some of the things that we look at as well, or that's important to look at, is just getting rep feedback, right? So that's a data element. So it might not be sort of a systemic data element, but it's just having some of those feedback sessions with reps, both reps, managers, directors, kind of across all levels of the organization in terms of what's working, what's not working. You know, another data source, for example, is just your inquiries, right? So the commission inquiries that reps submit, right? There could be things that are common issues, common things, and using some of that data to, again, improve the comp plan for the next cycle, so that we're not taking reps away from their time selling. They're not thinking about, you know, am I going to get paid correctly, and kind of keep a shadow accounting, if you will, of their commissions and so forth.
I think those are great examples, transitioning into, you know, can you kind of bring more qualitative data into your sales comp analytics? I guess like on that point, Les, is it more kind of qualitative discussions that we're having with the field, or are you running kind of structured surveys to gather feedback from the sales organization?
It's actually both. So in some of our sort of most, I'll say, the channels that require a bit more attention, that are maybe a little bit more, you know, finicky in terms of that, we definitely run surveys to first get that first layer of, you know, kind of a bulk, more data in terms of what's working, what's not. Obviously, there's specific questions, there's some open text, so those need to be interpreted. But then I think it does require that next level of context, and so that's where usually we would have like some sessions with just a representation from sales, certain, you know, reps, managers, and so forth, just around what does this mean. It might not be the person that, you know, submitted that comment is the one commenting on it, but it's just, I think there's a general understanding of across sales of what some of those things. So really, it's both are important to get that further extra 1 or 2 layers deeper.
Yeah. For the rest of the group, are you in any way kind of bringing in a qualitative element or qualitative feedback to some of these analytics?
We similarly do. We did a survey to the broader sales population to understand kind of like feedback on like similarly like what's going well, what's not, just to get kind of a baseline. We're more using that for like education purposes to see how can we help them understand the things better, or help them understand how they can impact the broader metric or whatever those components are, not necessarily for their feedback on how to change the metrics, because we want to make sure those are aligned to more like the broader organizational goals.
Yeah, we do at Red Hat. We've introduced this concept of a knowledge check, and we actually send out effectively, it's a dozen questions, and it's kind of what is your understanding of this, and then we actually assess, you know, what their level of understanding is. And to Courtney's point, we do it less for design purposes and more for just, hey, where do we need to have more information sessions? Where do we need to have trainings, et cetera? And that's how we target. We have quarterly enablement sessions, and we target them based on the feedback from those knowledge checks.
Makes sense. There was a couple points brought up around leveraging, you know, opportunity, potential, and kind of white space data within the sales compensation planning process, which I think is really interesting. For those of you that kind of have leveraged that in some of your processes, is that something that's owned by the sales comp team as part of that process, or is that a kind of broader organizational RevOps initiative where you need to kind of work more across the organization to be able to develop some of those analytics and pull it all together?
I can speak to the work that I was involved in. So that was actually part of, I guess it was within the marketing organization, really, looking at the enterprise space. So sales comp was one of the pieces that data used, but there was also, you know, a bunch of sort of reporting, business reporting that looked at things like share of wallet, right, and things like that. So we leveraged a lot of information, for example, from Dun & Bradstreet around company size, number of employees, like all those kinds of things, and then overlay that with other elements based on kind of propensity to spend for whatever the product was. But yeah, it was used in several different places, but the data itself did not sit within the commissions team, but it was the commissions team was a consumer of that data.
I had a similar experience. It was definitely collaboration between like RevOps, sales operations, like those other teams, but sales compensation was just a part of that.
And we at Red Hat, we actually organizationally address this by having like our go-to-market operations organization, kind of a business operations organization, be sort of the sister operation, or bigger brother operation, I guess, probably to incentives and like our performance management and analytics organization. For some period of time, they're actually under the same leader. Now we've actually split them out just because of the scope of what they're doing, but we're really joined at the hip for all this type of analytic that needs to take place. You need to be close to them organizationally, and that's really the what Red Hat's done to address it.
I so agree. I feel like silos are so deadly when we're trying to move things forward and move initiatives forward. And that's why, having the brothers and sisters across the organization, kind of reflecting that data back to you and you, sharing what you see in a really collaborative way is just so important.
And we actually had both our commissions team and sort of that GTM operations team under the same leader for a number of years, and recently moved it because we feel like there is that natural friction and that natural ability to kind of push back on each other on different components to make sure we get to the right answer. So commissions moved into HR, whereas like sales operations sits under the sales team.
Yeah. I think it's great to hear how you can kind of bring different sets of data from across the organization into the sales comp planning process, and in a way that can, really drive change to design and strategy. Courtney, you said something earlier around, like at least some part of the analytics being just about assessing, what's working and what's not within sales comp programs. I mean, for you today, kind of when you're thinking about sales comp analytics, like what are some of those things that you're looking at to understand if a plan, is working or isn't?
Yeah, I think there's a number of elements to it. It's what are the attainment actuals? So actually just looking at like, how are they performing? How are the sales teams performing across the different groups against the metrics in which we've set? And how does that translate back to how the organization's performing as a whole? So I think you need, I think someone else had mentioned this earlier, you need to be able to look at both the commission's outcomes and the company's financial performance and be able to compare those two pieces, because they should be pretty lockstep with each other. And so that's a data piece that we look at. The other piece that I think is extremely important is like, if you put a spiff out there or you're doing some special programming in order to drive an outcome, making sure you set what those outcomes are at the beginning to say, like, what am I expecting to see? And then monitoring that. I think a lot of times I've done it. I'm guilty of it. I know a lot of people are, where you throw it out there. You're moving so quickly. You're trying to get X, Y, and Z delivered. But just following through with, okay, what did we think was going to happen and what actually happened, and making sure it was money well spent.
For the rest of the group, is there anything else kind of specifically that you're looking at to assess plan for performance that makes sense to share with the audience?
I think for us, I think some of the similar things as Courtney was alluding to. So we definitely look at, for example, things like average rep attainment, business performance, and then, how are we performing to commission budget? So as an example, if the business is, at 98%, but your average attainment is like 110 or 120%, then something is off, right? Because then obviously, and then probably you're blowing your commission budget as well. And so somewhere it's misaligned. So, right. So obviously it's not going to be dead on, but you want it to be within a reasonable kind of variance in terms of, if the business is overachieving, then the reps are overachieving, then kind of, your budget maybe it's reasonable to go over your commissions budget if the business is overachieving as well, right? So, but just so things are moving kind of in that same direction.
Yeah, we have the same thing. That correlation to what you pay out as a percentage to kind of target incentive compensation to your performance is super critical. And right now we split into two. ACV is more like a transactional metric, where ARR is more like a portfolio management, like you're managing a much larger, broader portfolio. And the interesting part about it is like, do those really correlate from a payout perspective to the way that you're performing is critical. You can have a fantastic bookings quarter, but maybe it wasn't all that great from a revenue perspective. And so that should show up in those correlations between all those metrics. And if it doesn't, there's something that's wrong in your design.
Say, just going back to our basic statistics, right? I was a B student in statistics, but I at least got this, is just that normalized distribution curve, right? And so in compensation, right, we want that center at 100. And if not, there better be a darn good, strategic reason. And we want that standard deviation 1 up, 1 down to comprise the majority of folks in the plan. And so I think just understanding where everyone sits in their population is really important. And if you've got a bimodal curve, or if your curve is shifted to the right or to the left, understanding what's driving that reason. Maybe there is a good strategic business reason, or maybe there's something that you need to go uncover in your comp plan.
So I think these are some great examples of some kind of tactical things to include in some of those analytical packages. I think, something like we've seen a little bit more recently is, organizations trying to transition and, create a cadence to analyze incentive programs on a little bit more of a recurring basis throughout the year, instead of just looking at things kind of one time during the design process at the beginning of the period. I mean, is that the type of cadence that any of you are kind of trying to introduce in your organizations today? Bethany, if you want to stay on you, we can start there.
Yeah, I think it takes discipline, right? I think Courtney and Brian and Les, I think, probably alluded to this. It takes discipline of saying, hey, we're going to have a quarterly cadence, and we're going to review this very carefully, and we're going to review the results of our spiffs. We're going to review all of these things for their effectiveness. It takes a lot of discipline, and I feel like, us as sales compensation leaders, like there's a lot to do, and there's a lot that's on fire and super, super urgent. Where I saw it the best done, there was that discipline of a quarterly review and, a handful of metrics that everybody understood. And so we could understand where we're going. And so I just think that's so important.
Yeah, I'm currently challenging my team because we pay out commissions monthly. So I want to see kind of holistically, like what's going out the door from a monthly, like just at a very, very high level. Because one of the pieces I'm trying to just make sure leadership is aware of, and doing more of a quarterly cadence with the leadership team, is where we're spending the money and making sure it makes sense. So like, this is how much money we are spending on each of the different sales roles within the population. Here's how much money we're spending on each metric, just to make sure that it continues to make sense as we progress as an organization.
Yeah, we also look at, so we do send out, for example, monthly reports. If I think of one of our, like the enterprise business unit as an example, we definitely look at, the total spend against each of the metric, whether it's kind of a more acquisition sort of transactional deal type metric versus a revenue-based metric, and kind of seeing what the performance is there. And then on a less frequent, so around quarterly basis, kind of having a connection with the sales leaders in terms of just looking at some of that data. So what's the distribution? Like, are people achieving, are they achieving, their thresholds? What are some of those things that could be happening? Sometimes it could be something, factor of the sales comp plan. In other cases, it could be, something with respect to what's going on in the business. Maybe there's a quota, something with the quotas, those types of things as well. So, but yeah, a quarterly basis for sure.
Okay. So I mean, I think that's actually, it's a good segue. We've done a little bit of a deep dive on what data-driven incentive planning kind of looks like in practice. Designing incentive plans, of course, requires kind of getting alignment and buy-in across a wide variety of stakeholder groups. So I think, Les, you give a little bit of color there around kind of how you're starting to share these insights out on a monthly and quarterly basis with leadership. But for the group, like, how have you really gone about, sharing the results of sales comp analytics with, sales leaders and other teams to really help drive decision making, especially when we do have more access to real-time data and analysis? Like, what does that communication medium look like in that cadence? And Brian, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I can start on this one. Yeah, so we do a quarterly business review for each one of the geos, and then we have a global business review that's kind of a distilled version of everything that comes out of the geos. One of the things I do think that a lot of companies, including Red Hat, have some challenges in is making sure that the data that's shown within those QBRs is consistent, that it's measured in the same manner, that it's presented in the same manner. With us, we just sort of began our journey to centralize a lot of that, as opposed to make them very geo-specific. But every quarter we take a look at it. We make sure that they are provided with the appropriate metrics, and we try to build that into our business review process.
Anyone else have a different approach on how they've kind of shared out with leadership in the business?
Yeah, as we continue to kind of get more disciplined on this topic, because I do think it's continues to evolve, is the piece that I've found more beneficial is kind of keeping it a high level depending on the population in which you're reviewing with. So I typically will, if I'm sharing information with our CHRO or our CEO around the sales compensation, I keep it pretty simple in terms of investment dollars and kind of some of those components. I do think when I've been showing it to our CRO, if I want to make changes or want him to understand a component, I will blind the data and not show like individual humans' names, or I will kind of present it in a way to where he comes to the conclusion without me having to tell him the answer. And so I feel like being able to show your points in that way, especially if you're trying to use the data to make a different call or a different decision within the comp design.
That makes sense. Bethany, it looks like you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Yeah, I think it's so important to really know your audience, and to think about how they're going to receive data, and what they're going to understand, what they're not going to understand. And not everybody needs to be a comp expert. I think we as sales comp professionals, we have very high standards for other folks, and it's just building in that patience and building in that repetition and routine of, hey, I'm probably going to coach. I'm probably have to coach this item, a few times, right? And so I think about a recent example of where there was certain data that we were keeping in a spreadsheet with a lot of detail, and we pulled it out and made some, really easy to understand and easy to absorb visuals that were mostly directed toward leaders, of our segments. And that's when I started to see a few light bulbs come off about the understanding of how our comp plans were structured, the understanding of, our drive towards simplicity and the like. And so I think, that empathy for our audiences is just so important, making sure that it lands the right way. And if it doesn't work, with an Excel spreadsheet, try a visual. If it doesn't work with a visual, try some bullet points. If it doesn't work with a bullet point, try a one-on-one 15-minute coaching session. But really, really try, because if somebody doesn't understand it, then they're not going to drive the behavior and the results that we need to see.
Yeah, we do. Along that same note, Bethany, we sort of introduced this concept of on every slide that's presented, there's basically, how does that fit into the narrative, right? We actually insert a box on the right hand side to say, like, what are you taking away from the data that you see on the slide, and what does it mean? And that's been something, and it's simple, right? It's you were talking about no more than, say, three bullets or so. Just saying, what's the takeaway from this data? If there is no takeaway from the data, the slide shouldn't be in the deck.
Yeah, I think that makes lots of sense. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we are trying to boil down what can be, sometimes some pretty complicated analyses into, something that a sales leader, an operational leader that might not spend every day on it needs to be able to digest in a short period of time. I don't know, Les or Courtney, if there's any other kind of best practices or learnings that you've had as you've kind of distilled and communicated some of these findings out to the broader business.
I mean, I think it's, some of the things that have been mentioned already in terms of, like obviously what we, looking at performance, looking at how we're doing against budgets, looking at sort of distribution of of performance across sales, maybe across different metrics, right? Our gates, things of that sort. We've also done some analysis looking at things like cost of sales, right? So trying to kind of get a little bit more granular in terms of like, kind of looking at reps and who's driving, what business specifically, right? And sort of almost getting to a bit of a profitability level by rep, right? To see like, hey, this product has these margins, and then this is sort of what we're paying for commissions to sell that product, right? And getting kind of down to that more granular level. So we've looked at some of that as well. That's maybe a little bit less frequent, but it's some analysis that we've done.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's also a good segue into our next section, which is, we've talked about planning, we've talked about communication, but at the end of the day, to really be data driven from an incentive planning standpoint, there's obviously a lot of data and infrastructure that really needs to get brought together to be able to do it effectively. So, I mean, just realizing you all might be at different stages of the journey here, but what have you had to do to kind of bring together all of the data required to set a foundation to be more analytically driven in your sales comp process? Bethany, would you be okay to kick this one off?
Yeah, and I think there's definitely different points in the journey, right? And I think we all have experiences with dirty data. I'll just come out and say it. Data that we don't necessarily understand. Data that is defined differently. I am big on data dictionaries, making sure that even if there's a reason why we need to name the same metric differently, we at least align on what the definition is or what the calculation is or where we're diverging. And so I think that's, sort of table stakes as you try to bring those streams in. I think a lot of times we can yield to the tyranny of sort of getting all of the qualitative feedback from the field. And while that is important, Les, you talk about, doing your surveys and making sure that, you're connected in to the population you're serving, but then being able to balance that out with what you're seeing in the data. And sometimes that's hard to do because the data is not as integrated as you would have it be. But I think, sort of the baseline is just, what does it mean? What are we talking about? Where do we get, the original sources from, and kind of work out from there?
Yeah, that data dictionary is incredibly important. I can't stress how important it is to have alignment on exactly what goes into, whether it's a metric or whether it's some other calculation that's taking place. I mean, we had some issues actually as we introduced some of these new metrics that I talked about, where we actually had a different assumption underlying the calculation for one of the metrics for planning purposes and quota setting than we did in our CRM. So as you can imagine, that disconnect in the actual algebraic formula of the metric itself caused all sorts of problems as we went into the year, and that's that alignment, making sure that all the requirements are gathered, you're aligned with all your definitions, is just super important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think just because sometimes there's different reporting within the business as well, right? And so commissions is not always has specific commissions rules that are applied to the data. And so, we've had scenarios where maybe some of the business reporting is different by maybe 5, 7, even up to 10% different than the commissions reporting. And just, really critical to be able to explain those differences so that people know, there could be things like clawbacks and various comp rules that are applied. And so it's totally explainable, but just being able to do that, I think it's critical, because otherwise it, again, distracts sort of sales from selling.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the consistent reporting and like definitions on what you're reporting on and what they mean is extremely important. The other component that we had put in place, just from an infrastructure perspective, we actually have an HR analytics team that has access to kind of our various different tools and systems that we utilize, both on the broad-based comp side as well as the commission side. And so they are actually able to extract a number of different data points and do that statistical analysis for us, like whether we're looking at like sales productivity by rep, or if we want to understand like maybe attrition predictors or kind of some of those different components. We were able to put some things in place with that team to where they can produce those for us on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I'd be interested for the rest of the group's perspective, but who actually owns the consolidation of all of this data? Is that something that kind of sits within the sales comp team, or are you partnering with data and analytics teams to help pull kind of everything together from, commissions data to, data from other parts of the organization?
Yeah, ours was split. And just recently, I think we realized the benefit of actually combining it with the incentives organization under that kind of broader go-to-market operations umbrella. I think, again, it used to sort of reside in sort of a hybrid of finance. Technically, all of us roll up under finance in our CFO, at least in our organization. But for us, we just found that it was really important to have the analytics teams just right there, hand in hand with incentives, and under the same leadership organizationally.
I think that's why it's so important to make friends across the organization, and to be able to challenge too, but have those trusted relationships across the organization, because it may not be, a core function, that analytics function, but those are items that we need to be able to consume. And so understanding, again, the language of the finance data, the language of the sales data, the language of, the billings data, what have you, is really important. Doesn't sit with us. Not often has it sat with me, unless, sort of my older experience on the analytics team. But I just think making those connections is key.
For us, I would say from at least from a foundational data standpoint. So we are working towards kind of bringing all the data together in one single place. So essentially, think of it as sort of I guess a common landing area where all the commissions data is available, which allows us to kind of connect to a couple of the commissioning systems that we use. But at least it builds at least the foundation as one, and then obviously as we try to consolidate systems, then it kind of gives us a little bit more of that flexibility. So that's sort of the approach that we've taken.
Yeah, I think having that single source of truth is really important. There's so I think a couple of you brought up tactically a data dictionary, and I know that is a little bit more of a tactical item, but when I think of something that an organization could actually take back to their company and execute on to drive a little bit more alignment, I think that's a really good example. Would someone maybe be able to give a little bit of a deeper dive or a little bit more color around how to actually go about thinking to build out a data dictionary and get some alignment across the organization on what some of these metrics actually mean?
Yeah, I'll give it a stab, and I'm curious how it works with the other folks in their organizations. But I just think about it in a very blue collar way, right? So you've got a series of tabs in an Excel spreadsheet, right? The ones that you use the most often. The metrics that you use the most often. Each metric is a row with columns. So column might be calculation, another column might be definition, another column might be impacts what. And so you do that for your organization, and then you send it around to all your best friends in finance, your best friends in HR, your best friends in sales. And you say, hey, what are the metrics that you use the most? How are they calculated? What do they mean? What do they impact? And I think that's a good start. And then you can kind of iterate and, rumble a little bit about what they should mean, and use that to kind of start with an alignment, go to your friends in IT and say, hey, we believe it's calculated this way. Does this make sense? Is that what's in the code? That sort of thing.
Anyone else taking any different approach with structuring data dictionaries?
No, we've been really collaborative with our communications organizations, with our marketing organizations, with the sales operations and business operations organizations as well. We post everything to our intranet. And we really pitch it, right? It's part of our any part of our enablement sessions and our annual introduction of plans and changes and things like that. We're kind of constantly pointing to these things to try and build up that knowledge and make sure that people are aware of where there are tools and resources that can help them. Like I said, we've kind of done it with a cross-functional approach. No one team is sort of taking the lead on it, which probably if we were a little bit bigger, I think it'd be nice if we had that kind of centralized approach. But that's how we've done it over it right now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it's one of those things that I think, it takes alignment across a bunch of different teams to be able to do it right and really set the foundation. But okay, so I think we've covered a decent bit at this point, from leveraging analytics and planning to communication to infrastructure. But maybe just a couple final closing questions. But for companies that might be a little bit earlier in this journey, trying to bring more data and insight to their sales comp planning process, what would be your recommendations for how to actually start and kick off that journey? Maybe Courtney, I'll ask you to kick this one off.
Yeah, I think when kicking it off, I think you have to think of it as like it's a journey. You're not going to get all of the information or all of the data that you need in the first pass. So I think it's like starting small. Like, okay, how can I start pulling the data like to tell a story around, like I said earlier, like one thing that I like to do is tell the story around how are we investing these dollars? Like we have these commission dollars, which is a huge budget for most organizations. And so helping them understand where are we spending the dollars and how. And so just start like very high level, just start, I always say like, give me the raw data. I'm going to do some pivot tables. So just kind of breaking it down and starting there, and then you can kind of evolve from that starting point.
Yeah, I'd say making sure that sales has a seat at the table as well. I think what can happen is this turns into a conversation with finance. It turns into a conversation with some of those teams because they're financial metrics a lot of times. But making sure that sales understands exactly how the business results are being communicated to whom, what do they mean, what's the messaging that goes along with it, making sure they're at the same table during that conversation is really important. Because that way there's no disconnect, right?
I would say, kind of allude to, I think a little bit what Courtney talked about is what are the questions that you want to answer, right? So really ask sort of the qualitative questions that you want answered, and whatever those are, right? Am I getting the value for, the dollars I'm spending? Is it driving the right performance? Is it aligned to the business? Like all those kinds of things. Who are my top reps? What's the, what's happening? So really starting with the questions, and then kind of maybe also making it iterative. So it's getting that feedback, getting the other stakeholders at the table. Like Brian was alluding to, sales obviously being a critical one. You don't want to create sort of an animosities. You want to make sure that you partner with them, because obviously sometimes there could be that, that it's easy to kind of develop that where it's sort of, because you're almost like reporting on them. And so having them at the table and showing them the value of that in terms of how, this data can help improve performance and drive drive the results that they're trying to achieve as well. So, so just kind of starting with the questions and, making it a process, making it iterative, and just keep improving on it.
So agree, letting your curiosity be the guide, and thinking about what are the hypotheses that I have and how can I use the data to get to, sort of a yay or nay result, or, somewhere in between. And so, yeah, I just totally agree.
Awesome. And then I guess just kind of final closing thoughts. I mean, how do you see sales comp analytics evolving over the next few years, either at your organization or a little bit more broadly? I know, Bethany, if we want to stay on you for this one.
Yeah, it's just so exciting, right? I mean, we talked about like how things have changed in the past 5-10 years. And with the advent of AI, there's just so much more to see. And I think, as we continue to progress as a discipline, I think people are going to get used to this way of thinking and allow, the story is important. The story is oh so important, but it also gets to be tempered with the data. And so I see nothing but opportunity here.
I agree. I think, it's only going to continue to get better. And I think it's only going, I feel like the more I show data to my business leaders, the more they want. And so I think it's a continuous conversation. But again, the more you show them, it's just you're gonna need to provide more and more and more. So just be prepared for that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right, Courtney? I mean, we get a lot of anecdotal comments and things like that from the sales organization to us and say, oh, well, this isn't working. We don't like this. We really have to kind of see through whether or not that's one person of many, or if that really is a trend, or if it really is an issue. The only way to do that is to prove it out in the data, right? And that's been one of the bigger things that we've seen right now. Is making sure that you're making like true data-driven decisions when it comes to things that you're modifying.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, all the things that have been mentioned, I think the other thing for us is being a little bit more agile as well, and just kind of connecting everything together better. So Rogers, for example, we acquired a company called Shaw. And so there's a lot of separate systems, a lot of different billing systems that we're kind of tying in. And I think getting better at that. So like, for example, if the business strategy for a particular company is acquisitions, right, is how do you build that sort of that muscle to be able to kind of do that quickly, integrate that, merge your sales organizations, merge the comp plans, and where it needs to be similar or different based on geography and things like that. So I think just that agility. I think, the world is sort of accelerating. The amount of data is accelerating. Obviously, we have AI to kind of hopefully leverage some of that. But I think just that ability to respond quicker is going to be even more important going forward.
Awesome. I think these are great points. I think a lot of it comes down to, at the end of the day, making decisions based on, fact and not perception. But I think we're getting a little bit close on time today, so I think this is a good place to wrap. But really, just thank you everyone for joining today. A big thank you to our panelists, Brian, Les, Courtney, and Bethany, for coming on and sharing your very deep expertise. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and hope you'll all join us for our final session of Nudge tomorrow, where we'll be diving into the trends that will shape the next decade in sales compensation. So, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.